Well, sessions of synod seem to come around even more quickly these days. It seems no time since we were gathered here a year ago. As it is the third session of the current synod, it means that we have concluded 3 years of work together. Most of us were here in 2022 when we began this 57th synod. Next year then, we'll be preparing to change membership. Some of you, many of you may be back, but there will be some fresh faces amongst us. However, every session of synod, some people do join for the first time, either because they're clergy new to the diocese or because some vacancies have arisen in ministry units. So if you are here for the first time, it would be great to be able to acknowledge and greet you and welcome you. Could you please stand amongst us? Welcome. Good luck. There are also inevitably those who have left us, those who served as members of the Synod in years gone by. And so as we remember those who have died, could you all now stand? And I'll read their names and we'll hold a time of thankful memory. From the House of Bishops, the Right Reverend Bruce Gilbert. The House of Clergy, the Reverends Judy Vorse, Boyd Wilson, Paul Gravel, Martin Bridge, Clay Nelson, David Swan, John Hewlett, Samuel Prasad, Jean Brooks, Bob Neeson, Callum Gilmore, and just this week, Neil Fuge. In the House of Laity, Rod Oram from the parish of St Andrew Epsom, Heather Ayrton, the Mission District of Waimati North, Janice Cooper from the parish of Whangaporawa, Yvonne Coward, the parish of Pakuranga, Ron Buckton from the parish of Warkworth, and also from Warkworth, Maggie Stansfield and Peter Reeks. Rest eternal grant unto them, O God, and let light perpetual shine upon them. May they rest in peace and rise in glory. Inoho, thank you. This last week has seen the unexpected death of Te Kingi Tūhetia Pōtātou Te Wherewhere VII. So unexpected, in fact, that Bishop Kito had just begun a journey to Geneva, and when he reached Dubai, he learnt of the death of Te Kingi, got on the next available flight and came straight home. I had the amazing experience and privilege of being at Tūrangawaewae on Tuesday and joining with our Mihinari delegation at the morning pōhuri so that we could pay our respects. It was very tempting to be there today for this last part of the tangihanga, but the demands of Synod kind of trumped it, I have to say. I didn't want to arrive here just a little bit overwhelmed by the day's experience. Kingi Tūhetia has been referred to as Te Kingi o te Kotahitanga. His efforts and calls for unity not only among Māori but within our nation as a whole. That's been the dominant theme of his leadership over the past 18 years. It was seen powerfully at the start of the year when 10,000 people arrived at the national hui at Tūrangawaewae that he had called a hui on unity. Then just a fortnight ago, at the celebrations on the 18th anniversary of his coronation, the challenge was issued to the government about the proposed Treaty Principles Bill, built on the many challenges that have been offered to that piece of legislation over the months. Challenges also come from our archbishops to it. Well, at that hui, such is the mana of Te Kingi, that the National Party and New Zealand First indicated there that they would not support the progress of this legislation through Parliament. That's a relief for many of us, but it has been given a lot of political airtime since it was proposed as part of the coalition agreement. Clearly still, presumably, it's going to get as far, say, as a first reading, maybe even a select committee hearing within the politics of the coalition to allow it to have had its time. It does worry me that coalition politics, in order to bring a ruling government together, somewhat has played with the population in the uncertainty and anxieties that have been caused through this issue. Other coalition partners clearly do not intend to support it. So, wherever this ends up, let's hope and pray that there are good debates when the time comes, that there's the honest facing of issues that are important to people about treaty principles, and that in the end the ground we have gained over so many decades can result in a reassertion of what is a critical foundational element to our nationhood. So let's pray for kotahitanga, for unity in our nation. And let's also welcome and acknowledge the new Māori monarch, Kuini ngā wai hono i te pō, as she assumes leadership of the kingitanga. Well, Bishop Kito had hoped to be here tonight, but his involvement in King Tuhetia's funeral today has prevented that. I look forward to being present at the opening of the Hui Amarangi for Te Tai Tokiro in a couple of weeks' time. Our partnership as Diocese and Amorangi extends back now with a long history, long before, in fact, the three tikanga structures were put in place. Good intentions have not always evinced in ideal actions, but we must never take this relationship for granted as a result. We need to continue to work actively on it. And I'm pleased that our Diocesan Council is very committed to that. And so tomorrow in their report we'll hear something of our current activity to continue to build that relationship ever more strongly. We engaged with Te Manawa Te Wheke in relation to parts of the diocese in the northern Waikato and the Coromandel Peninsula, the southern boundary of our diocese. It's a less active partnership due to the relationship that Te Manawa Te Wheke has with several dioceses that they need to interrelate with. It doesn't go ignored though, and there's been work done with them in recent years. And of course, Tikanga Pacifica, the Diocese of Polynesia is present here in Auckland. Archbishop Sione and I would like to attend to some work to clarify and hopefully strengthen those relationships, that ministry that they do undertake here, clergy from Polynesia who are present in Auckland. Some of your ministry units offer hospitality to Pacifica congregations around Auckland. The basis on which that occurs needs clarifying, it needs a much stronger foundation, and as a result I hope for an even more true partnership to emerge. The Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care in State and Faith-Based Institutions has completed its work and it's published its final report, Whanaketia. The Commission's been working since early 2018 and it's heard from thousands of survivors, it's held numerous public hearings, it's examined countless documents, witness statements. There have been several interim reports. The final report is extensive, it's many volumes, and I encourage people to read it, at least to read its executive summary and the key findings, to help you to understand the extent and the impact of abuse in institutional care through the second half of last century, and especially to understand the Church's part in that. I know that won't be easy reading, but as members of this Church who were part of the inquiry and who have been part of its focus and the place that we held in abuse in some of our institutions within our Church, it's important that we understand. It's not possible to adequately summarise the report, but it does feel important that I record here some of the critical matters, and especially those that relate to the Anglican Church. It's difficult material. I want to acknowledge that amongst us tonight there may be some who are themselves survivors of abuse and for whom this could be difficult to hear. The Commission estimates that perhaps 200,000 people were subject to abuse in the period from 1950 to 1999, which was the scope that it was examining. The abuse was wide-ranging in its form, including psychological, emotional, physical, sexual, and spiritual abuse. The environment for making abuse possible was created through all of the structural failures of institutions, the attitudes of our society in those decades, poor practice, and a lack of accountability and a failure by leadership in institutions to respond effectively to complaints when people found the courage to make them. Within faith-based institutions, further factors were identified. The moral authority that faiths can hold, the trustworthiness of clergy and leaders, and at times the misuse of beliefs to justify abuse. The impacts on survivors through the trauma experience has been on the quality of the relationships they've been able to form, confusion and distortion around issues of gender and sexuality, impacts on physical and mental health. It's led for some people to antisocial behaviour, substance abuse and crime as they have struggled to find their place within society. When commenting on the Anglican Church, the following was noted in relation to fault. I quote from the report. The Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia was at fault for 1. Promoting corporal punishment, normalising bullying in schools, and suppressing Māori and Pacific peoples' culture. 2. Failing to implement monitoring and leaving management to individual leaders. 3. Allowing complaints to be managed by those familiar with the alleged abusers, with some unwilling to accept a fellow clergy member could be an abuser. 4. Failing to protect people and hold abusers accountable by ignoring or covering up abuse. Perpetrators were shielded by the sanctity of their roles within the Church. And 5. Disbelieving survivors initially and labelling them as untrustworthy or deceitful. I end the quote there. The Anglican Church has sought to participate in all of these proceedings in good faith. And along the way in these past 6 years or so, we've learned an enormous amount about the appropriate trauma-informed response to survivors of abuse. The Commission has called for actions to right the wrongs of the past and for public apologies to be made to those harmed. This is work to which we are committed, and we have been working actively on redress with survivors of abuse within the Church and its related institutions. Whanaketia has set out 138 recommendations to which the state and faith-based institutions must now respond. Together, the plan is that we establish a path forward so that as a society we can do our best to ensure that our state, our churches, our schools, other institutions are safe places where genuine care can be offered and received. The publication of the final report is not the end of the mahi that is required to achieve this. Our church is working across the tikanga on a whole of church response to the recommendations. We wish to respond with one voice. As a church, we are facing big issues about our purpose and our structure so that we can offer good pastoral ministry for those who are part of our gathered life, and also to equip ourselves to participate well in the mission of God as bearers of God's love and of the gospel message. Thank you, Sarah, again for your sermon tonight, which has begun to prepare the ground in our minds for some of the work that we must do. There's several items of business you'll have seen. I'm going to give some focus to this. The proposed new parish statute is designed to allow for our local church structures to more easily fit their capacity and their context around how they can gather and be together. Conference sessions going to allow us to have some theological conversations, small groups meeting, to be able to set a wider context for our decision making. And a number of motions you'll have seen invite us to put specific things in place to try and set a direction for how mission can occur into the future. Let me offer a few comments on what I see. We've known the pain and the challenge of decline for some time. At the moment, that decline is being exacerbated by sudden rising costs. They've been exemplified, I think, in every place by the increases in insurance premiums that feel like they've pushed us over the edge. We've had an overall decrease in income. And decline in numbers also means a decline in people actively engaged in our ministry units. And that in turn means that many of the tasks that were undertaken by volunteers now often fall to the clergy to pick up because there's no one else to do those things. Increased tasks around administration and the management of our buildings and so on leaves less time for pastoral ministry and for the clergy to lead the people of God in the work of mission. What a challenging spiral of things it is. And then there's property. It's an amazing blessing and a huge challenge, all at the same time. We have 2 centuries of accumulated wealth and property from which we benefit. We have churches that have absorbed the prayers of generations of believers, that have hosted times of great joy and of deep sadness for families. Those churches hold great meaning for people. They're our sacred spaces. And that's significant not just for the current generation of worshippers that gather in them, but for the life of the whole wider community, people who value the presence of those churches in their community and what they symbolise and what they offer. But we also know that our buildings are places that exist to serve God's mission. They're to be places where we gather to worship and to be equipped for our work. They're places from which we go to undertake that work of mission and in turn to be able to bring others, an identifiable place where people know they can come to discover more of God's grace. They stand as a sign in the community of God's presence. So we live with this tension, not easily resolved. The respect we have for our buildings and for what they represent, whether they are a benefit to God's mission or whether they become an end in themselves and thus an impediment to God's mission. So in that tension, we need to face the questions that arise from this very carefully. And the Synod invites us to do so. Speak well together about those things. These have been discussions that we've been kind of scaffolding towards. Recent synods have asked for particular work to be done. The Episcopal team has done some considerable thinking on these issues. The Diocesan Council has developed thinking about it within their strategy work. The Ministry Conference spent intensive time earlier this year on questions about mission and the restraints that we're experiencing as we try to undertake it. But, as a former church warden of mine used to love to tell me when I was looking exasperated, challenge always offers us opportunity, he said. And our task gathered synodically is to discern where those opportunities are, to set a path to make good use of these amazing resources that we have. As an aside, I'd add that organisationally, we're not facing these issues on our own as the church. They're real right across the charitable and not-for-profit sector. Compliance, cash flow, volunteers, asset maintenance. It's a perfect storm of issues that is preventing a whole lot of organisations from feeling that they're able to fulfil what their core purpose is. I've thought a lot on the nature of the Jerusalem church as it's described in Acts 2. Not in an idealised way, as I often hear people talking about, if only we could be like the Jerusalem church in Acts 2. Because you see, if you read carefully over those couple of chapters, they weren't without their organisational challenges and their theological disputes. But I've read and thought about that church with a view to see what was the essence of its life. And I see this. People gathered together in personal encounter. They read the scriptures together and they interpreted them so that they could understand their meaning. They celebrated the sacraments. They prayed together. They cared for one another. And beyond their care for each other, they cared for the wider community and sought to make known the love of God and the good news of Jesus to others. Those are the things that we must ensure that we retain in our life, wherever our structures and the use of our resources might take us. I believe that our faithful God will help us do so. The work of God's mission is undertaken in so many ways, not just within the familiar structures of our local ministry units. All of our social service agencies are doing phenomenal work in their respective areas of expertise. Cuts in government funding are having a huge impact on that. The Whangarei Care Centre and the Auckland City Mission in particular have reported to me about how those kind of cuts are going to affect their ability to provide the sort of services that they believe their clients need in our cities. And so on Saturday morning, we will hear from Helen Robinson, our City Missioner, a little bit about that. Ministry is also being undertaken through our chaplaincies in various institutions, and most especially our schools. And so it's going to be great to hear from our set of school chaplains also on Saturday morning. So look at the business, can I say how good it is to see a number of motions from younger people within our membership of Synod, matters that they have brought to the order paper. I think it's hugely heartening to see youth wanting to play an active part in the direction of our church. Last year, Archbishop Philip Richardson officially concluded his term as Senior Bishop for Tikanga Pākehā after 10 years in that role. In practice, actually, he's largely done it for a further year as it's taken that long for us to appoint a new senior bishop, which we achieved at General Synod earlier this year. Archbishop Philip has brought huge energy to his work as senior bishop. He represented our church well in so many ways, both nationally and across our global Anglican communion. His leadership of the church's response to the Royal Commission has probably exemplified his commitment both to us as a church, but also to the well-being of other people. We owe him a debt of gratitude for all he has given to that role. It's a hugely demanding role. And especially, I think we want to make an acknowledgement of the impact that's had not only on him and his family, but on the Diocese of Waikato and Taranaki, as he's had to manage all of those dispersed responsibilities, his many absences from that diocese. The Bishop of Wellington, Justin Duckworth, now assumes this role, and we pray God's blessing on him and on the Diocese of Wellington as he does so. It's really good that the primacy of our church is kind of complete and stable once again. There was a long sort of absence of our Archbishop for Pacifica after the death of Archbishop Whareimi and before Archbishop Sione was elected. And then, of course, this last year, although Archbishop Philip's been continuing in some senior bishop roles, he hasn't been part of the primacy. So once again, we have our three archbishops together. I greatly appreciate the words of encouragement that I've been offered in recent times, as people have recognised some of the complexity and demand of the role. I know in the way that I respond, often I can seem reluctant to receive those messages, such as my personality. But please know I really value that support. I'm at times tangibly aware of the prayers of people for me in the ways that I sense the sustaining grace of God. It's wonderful. In turn, I wish to encourage and thank you. At the end of 3 years of Synod, the commitment of people to the intense work that we do over these couple of days is remarkable. I know at times some of what we do might seem tedious, but the sum of it over the years enables the good governance of our diocese to be undertaken, and so guides us in new ways on the path of Christ as we work together to build God's kingdom in a constantly changing environment. The Diocesan Council, whose membership you appoint year by year, is an amazing group of people. They give their time and their talents to carry that work of governance through the year and to try not to be too exasperated by the motions that say, let's appoint another working group of Diocesan Council to do something else. I've been blessed, members of DC, as we say, as we shorten it. I've been blessed by your grasp of the issues that we face and the vision with which you approach the resolution of those issues. It's always within a framework of what is good for God's people and the impact, in turn, that we can make for good in our world. There are so many others who become part of the extension of that work through their willingness to be involved in advisory committees and in working groups. It's all voluntary time, people contributing their talents and their insights so that together we can build up the body of Christ and equip us for our work of mission. That work receives lots of support from the Nelligan House team, led by our diocesan manager, Sonia Moore. It's a relatively small team. They can all fit around one table up there, but it does an enormous amount, bringing the hopes and decisions of others into reality. They've all been part of the infrastructure and hospitality which you'll enjoy over Synod. So take the opportunity to put faces to some names that you may know. It's good to actually build the relationships in